The allure of the suburbs is a powerful one, a promise of peace, a sanctuary from the noise of the city. We all recognize them, those perfect suburban streets, stretching out like a carefully constructed dream. Every detail is in its place. The lawns are manicured with surgical precision. White picket fences stand as polite, symbolic boundaries. In the golden light of the afternoon, the laughter of children on bicycles echoes, a sound that should be pure joy. Neighbors exchange pleasantries over freshly cut grass, their smiles as uniform as their homes. It's a tableau of American idealism, a carefully curated portrait of safety and community. Everything is exactly as it should be, or so it seems. But beneath this polished surface, a different reality can fester. The same quiet that offers peace can also conceal secrets. The uniformity that provides comfort can mask a chilling anonymity. You see your neighbors, but do you truly know them? What thoughts circulate behind their drawn curtains as twilight descends? What if the greatest threat isn't an intruder from the outside, but a quiet evil that has been there all along, observing, waiting? What if behind those freshly painted doors, an obsessive gaze is fixed upon you? Sometimes the monster isn't under the bed. Sometimes they live right next door. For Derek and Maria Broaddus, this suburban nightmare became terrifyingly real. Their story began with a dream. After years of hard work, they found it. A magnificent 6-bedroom Dutch colonial at 657 Boulevard in the affluent town of Westfield, New Jersey. It was more than just a house. It was the culmination of their aspirations. A sprawling, beautiful home with a century of history etched into its walls. With a large yard for their 3 young children to play in, it was the perfect place to put down roots. It was, in every sense, their forever home, a place they believed would be filled with cherished memories. But the house had other plans, or rather, someone else did. Before the first moving box was even unpacked, the letters began to arrive. The first one appeared just 3 days after they closed on the property, in a plain white envelope addressed in clunky, handwritten block letters to the new owner. Inside, the note began with a deceptively warm welcome. But the friendliness was thin, stretched over a deeply unsettling possessiveness. The writer claimed the house had been the subject of their family for decades. They introduced themselves not as a neighbor, but as the Watcher. The tone quickly turned sinister, speaking of the house's second coming, and asking if the family had brought the young blood it had been waiting for. The writer claimed to be watching, noting details about their car and the contractors they'd hired. Then came the chilling question, "Have you found what is in the walls yet?" In an instant, their dream home had become a source of pure, unadulterated dread. The police investigation began, but it was like chasing a ghost. DNA was collected from an envelope, but there was no match. The Broaddus family hired their own private investigators. Cameras, alarms, the chilling feeling of being watched never left. The letters described an almost supernatural connection to the house. "It calls to me. It wants what is inside you. An invisible enemy, someone who saw everything but could not be seen." Derek and Maria couldn't sleep, tormented by the unknown. The dream of a happy life there was dead. Ultimately, they never moved into 657 Boulevard. The story went public. Who would buy a house with its own stalker? The Watcher was never caught. The letters stopped. The fear remained. The house still stands, a silent monument to a family's shattered dream. The suburbs are built on a promise of safety, an illusion of a world sealed off from danger. Our next story, from Fukuoka, Japan, proves that sometimes the most terrifying threats aren't trying to break in. They're already inside. It centers on a man starting a new life in an apartment he believed was his sanctuary, a place of quiet routines where everything was exactly as he left it, or so he thought. It began with small oddities. Food from the fridge would vanish. At first, he blamed his own forgetfulness. Then came the sounds in the dead of night, a soft shuffling, a quiet rustle from inside the walls. Each time he'd investigate, the house was silent. He started to question his own senses. The feeling of being watched became too persistent. Driven by a need for answers, he purchased a small security camera and concealed it in his kitchen. He had to know the truth. He watched the feed for 2 nights. The footage showed nothing but an empty, silent apartment. Relief began to set in. But on the 3rd night, as he scrubbed through the hours of static quiet, he saw it, a flicker of motion. He rewound the footage, his heart pounding. The movement wasn't from a door or a window. It came from a place he never thought to look, the top shelf of his closet. On the screen, a small panel slid silently open. From the darkness within, a woman emerged. She was thin and disheveled, moving with a slow, practiced stealth. She dropped silently to the floor, not like an intruder, but like someone who belonged there. He watched, frozen, as this stranger walked to his refrigerator and helped herself to a drink. She moved through his private space with a chilling sense of ownership, as if this was her home. The truth crashed down on him. He wasn't alone. He immediately called the police. When they arrived, he showed them the footage. They cautiously approached the closet, discovered the hidden panel, and found her curled up inside the small dark space. Her name was Tatsuko Horikawa, a 58-year-old homeless woman. The space she occupied was a grim, miniature apartment with a small futon and plastic bottles. She had been living a parallel life, just inches above his head as he slept. Upon questioning, Horikawa admitted she had lived in the closet for a full year. She had slipped in through an unlocked door and simply stayed, emerging only when he was asleep or away. She had even used his shower, carefully cleaning up any trace. The story became a media sensation, a real-life horror story that gave a name to the urban legend of frogging. For the resident, his sanctuary was violated in the most intimate way, a terrifying reminder that the creak in the floorboards might not just be your imagination. In the autumn of 1941, as the world braced for war, the city of Denver was haunted by a far more intimate terror. It wasn't a ghost, but a phantom of flesh and blood, a whisper in the dark that preyed not on possessions, but on peace of mind. On otherwise quiet suburban streets, a chilling legend was taking root, born from a series of inexplicable events that suggested someone, or something, could slip through locked doors and vanish without a trace. The phantom's calling card was confusion. Homeowners would return to find not a ransacked house, but a subtly altered one. Furniture would be moved just a few inches, objects would be inexplicably rearranged, and strange, worthless tokens were sometimes left behind. The intrusions were so subtle, so bizarre, that victims began to question their own sanity. It was a violation of the deepest kind, the feeling that your private sanctuary was no longer your own. Then, the encounters escalated. People woke in the dead of night to the unshakable feeling of being watched, their eyes adjusting to the gloom to find a gaunt figure standing silently in the shadows of their own bedrooms. Before they could scream, he would simply melt away, leaving them paralyzed with a fear more primal than any nightmare. The man was Theodore Edward Coneys. At 59, he was sickly, frail, and utterly unsuspected. A vagrant battling tuberculosis, Coneys had known the Peters family years ago and remembered a particular detail about their house on 3335 West Moncrief Place. In September, learning that 73-year-old Philip Peters' wife was in the hospital, Coneys saw his chance. He broke in, not for a single night of shelter, but for a permanent escape from the world. He sought out the feature he remembered, a small hidden closet panel. Behind it was a dark, narrow crawl space, a dusty tomb barely large enough to lie down in. This tiny, forgotten void inside the walls of another family's home became his entire world. For 5 weeks, he lived there in absolute secrecy. He was a parasite in the architecture, emerging only when the house was still and dark to steal scraps of food and water. He listened to the life of Philip Peters through the vents, a silent, invisible roommate privy to every conversation, every footstep, every breath. On the night of October 17th, Coneys' luck ran out. Emboldened by weeks of success, he crept to the kitchen refrigerator. The click of the latch and the sudden hum of the motor echoed in the silent house. Upstairs, Philip Peters heard it. He came downstairs to investigate and found the spectral intruder in his kitchen. The frail, skeletal man was no phantom, but a terrified trespasser. A struggle ensued, a clash of shock and desperation. Cornered and panicked, Coneys grabbed a heavy cast-iron stove shaker. He swung wildly, striking Peters again and again. The blows were clumsy, frantic, and brutally fatal. In a surge of pure terror, Coneys didn't flee the house. He retreated into it, scrambling back into his tiny crawl space, inches from the body of the man he had just killed. When police arrived, they were completely baffled. Philip Peters was dead, but the house was locked securely from the inside. There was no sign of forced entry, no murder weapon, and no motive. It was an impossible crime. Weeks passed. The city panicked, gripped by the story of the Denver Phantom. Meanwhile, Mrs. Peters moved out, and the house sat empty, save for the killer hiding in its walls, starving and terrified. Months later, police noticed the house was being visited. Suspecting a new intruder, they staked it out. Finally, an officer inside heard a sound from a closet and saw a detail everyone had missed: scuff marks on the floor and a faint crack in the ceiling. He pushed on the panel. It gave way, revealing a black void. A flashlight beam cut into the darkness and landed on a pair of skeletal legs. They pulled down a man so emaciated and covered in dust and cobwebs, he looked more like a mummy than a human being. He weighed less than 80 pounds. It was Theodore Coney's. The press dubbed him the Denver Spiderman. He confessed immediately, explaining he had remained hidden for 9 months, too terrified of the murder he'd committed to ever leave his self-made prison. The nightmare for the city was over, but the story became a permanent scar on Denver's psyche, a chilling reminder that the monsters we fear aren't always outside. Sometimes they're already inside. The oldest fear of all, the man in the walls, had been made terrifyingly real. These stories are not fictions, they are real. They happen to ordinary people in ordinary houses on ordinary streets. The Watcher, the Closet Dweller, the Denver Spiderman. The horror lies in their familiarity. What happens when the danger is already inside? It hides in the spaces we overlook. It watches from a distance, or from inches away. It writes letters, it steals food, it listens. By the time we realize it's there, it's already too late. So lock your doors, check your closets. Try not to think about what or who might be hiding in the quiet, dark corners. Sweet dreams.